Good evening and welcome to the regular council meeting for May 18th, 2022. And I call the meeting to order and we are beginning at 6:01 p.m. This time I'd like to confirm the agenda. Are there any emergent items from any of the councillors tonight? Seeing and hearing on anything from the administration or ledge services? Any emergent items, Jonathan?
Thank you, Your Worship. Administration's requesting that Council remove item 12.1, in-camera item for unallocated surplus. Advice from officials 24-1A.
Thank you, Jonathan. So, councillors, I'm looking for a motion to confirm the agenda as amended. Councillor Langmaid?
I move to accept the agenda as amended.
Thank you. You've all heard the motion. All in favor? And the motion is carried. This brings us to the public hearing. The public hearing for Bylaw 22-01, being a bylaw to amend Land Use Bylaw number 14-11, is in session at 6:02 p.m. This public hearing is held pursuant to the Municipal Government Act, RSA 2000, Chapter M-26, and amendments thereto. Manager of Legislative Services. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Your Worship. The purpose of this public hearing is to discuss Bylaw 2201, being a bylaw to amend Land Use Bylaw 1411. First reading was given April 20th, 2022. The public hearing was advertised April 27th, 2022 in the Strathmore Times, April 28th, 2022 in the utility bill insert, May 2nd, 2022 in an email to 549 people who have business licenses with the town, May 3rd, 2022 on Facebook, May 4th, 2022 in the Strathmore Times, and May 9th, 2022 on Facebook. No written submissions have been received by the deadline for this public hearing.
Thank you, Jonathan. The following rules of conduct will be followed during the public hearing. No person shall address council without the permission of the mayor. No person shall speak more than once or more than 5 minutes exclusive of the time required to answer questions from council. No councillor may debate the bylaw that is subject to the public hearing. Respect for staff, council, and the public shall always be maintained, and any person who wishes to address council shall state and spell their name for the record. The order of presentation shall be the administration, those in favor of the bylaw, those opposed to the bylaw, any other person deemed to be affected by the bylaw. Council may ask questions of the speakers after each presentation for clarification purposes. Administration, would you like to present now? Good evening, Megan.
Good evening, Your Worship and Council. I am Megan, Planner 3 for the Town of Strathmore, here to present Bylaw 22-01. So we're proposing several amendments to the Land Use Bylaw 1411. Just a quick highlight, the amendments we're proposing are intended to clarify, update, and to improve the development regulations. There are proposed amendments to remove out-of-date references and regulations, increase variance powers for our development officers, and to create a new section regulating CCANs. The RFD, the request for decision, goes into detail as to why staff are proposing these amendments, so I'll only discuss the ones that council had specific questions around at first reading, which were the backlit signage, sidewalks, and CCANs, and then any changes that staff are proposing. If council or residents would like staff to explain any of the other amendments, we will happily do so. So we'll start with the signage. So the Downtown Overlay District no longer allows backlit signage. This means that any existing backlit signs are considered non-conforming. So staff have been using Section 643 of the Municipal Government Act to guide decisions around repair or upgrades to backlit signs. This section says that any buildings with damage meeting and exceeding 75%, if those signs are to be rebuilt, must be rebuilt in conformance with the Land Use Bylaw. Therefore, if a backlit sign falls off due to a storm, the building owner would be expected to replace the signage with something that conforms. For this reason, staff is bringing forward the recommendation to create an exemption in these instances. The question was asked at first reading, if signs were to be vandalized, what would the process be? And so with the proposed amendment, vandalized signs would still need to be less than 75% damaged in order to be repaired. Any more than that, and they'll need to be brought into compliance. Next one is sidewalks. So currently, the downtown overlay district only requires a sidewalk aisle of 1 meter if a business is to use that sidewalk for outdoor seating. As knowledge of how people of different ages and abilities use public spaces becomes more mainstream, changes such as increasing minimum sidewalk aisle become more common. The American Disabilities Association explain a wheelchair needs 0.9 meters of space and suggest at minimum a sidewalk width of 1.5 meters to allow 2 wheelchair users to pass each other. Surrounding municipalities have between 1.8 and 2 meters for their aisle width. The question at first reading was asked how this would impact businesses that currently have sidewalk patios. If this amendment is passed, those sidewalk patios, if they didn't meet that 1.8 minimum width, would be considered non-conforming, and so they'd be able to kind of keep their patio so long as they had permission beforehand. So with upgrades to downtown sidewalks completed in 2017 and 18, staff is confident that the sidewalks will be able to accommodate any future requests for sidewalk patios. And this is the juicy one. So the largest batch of amendments is to create new CCAN section. This was originally requested through the fire department specifically to protect the first responders who may attend a call involving a CCAN. In recent years, there have been a few incidences involving CCANs that have resulted in the death or serious injury to firefighters. Prohibiting the storage of hazardous materials in CCANs is the most direct way to avoid a catastrophic incident involving a CCAN. However, as there's still a high chance that people may store hazardous materials, either unknowingly or knowingly, requiring the installation of vents will provide a secondary fail-safe. Vents provide 2 benefits. So it not only compromises the structural integrity of the CCAN, which lessens the risk of the catastrophic failure, the location of the vents near the ground and at the top of the CCAN on the opposite end for each other allows air to naturally be drawn through the CCAN, helping to cool it down. And then we have a bunch of proposed amendments. So staff did a tour of the town to better understand where CCANs are and the number of CCANs in use per lot, and found they were primarily concentrated in the industrial district south of the highway. The generality of the originally proposed table 3.35, which is up on the screen, the top there, which restricts the size and number of CCANs based on lot size, would restrict many of these businesses from adding more CCANs to their property. So staff is just proposing to remove the table and subsequent regulations, so the regulations that kind of impact or are in place because of that table, from the original batch of proposed amendments for later consideration. This still leaves the majority of the proposed CCAN regulations in the proposed bylaw.
Can I just confirm? So that means that there'll be less limitations on the number of CCANs that these businesses can own? By dropping that,
There will be no limitations.
no
on the number of
limitations,
CCANs.
thank you.
The second additional amendment is a correction to the table under section 3.2 of the land use bylaw. It's just up on the screen there for you folks. The intent of this table is to allow certain types of development to project into the minimum yard setback, which isn't evident based on how the table is now. To correct this, staff are proposing the table heading, maximum projection from the main wall permitted, that's just in orange there, or like the lighter color, be rewritten to say maximum projection into required maximum projection into required yard setback permitted. And then the changes that were proposed at first reading just be restored. So instead of negating the deck's open and roofed porch extending into the side yard setback, allowing it to go that 2 meters. Most of our residential districts have a rear yard setback of 7 meters. So basically what this table says, as it is up on the screen, is that the rear yard setback for decks, open or roofed porch, patios not exceeding 1 story in height can go have a rear yard setback of 5 meters. And then the last one is to the highway commercial district. So staff have received a few requests regarding operating auto body and paint shops within the highway commercial district. Currently, it's not permitted, so a business has to redesignate their parcel to a direct control district. Currently, we have 3 parcels that have taken this route, with a 4th that has put in an inquiry in the last month. As there have been no issues to date at these approved locations, and auto body and paint shops in commercial districts is consistent with other municipalities, Staff are recommending we include auto body and paint shops as a discretionary use and to add a regulation that prohibits the bay doors containing auto body and paint shops from facing adjacent residential districts. This will be more relevant at second reading, but I've got the recommendation for the council motion up on the screen as well. That does conclude my presentation, and I am available for all the questions. Thank you.
Questions from councillors? Seeing none, I guess we can move on to the next section. Is there anyone present who supports the bylaw who wishes to speak? And on my list, I have a gentleman named Seamus Ryan. If you wouldn't mind coming to the microphone, and then if you could spell your first and last name so it can be entered into the minutes. Good evening and welcome, Seamus.
You want me to spell my name?
Yes, please, first and last name if you don't mind.
Seamus, S-E-A-M-U-S. Last name Ryan, R-Y-A-N.
Thank you. And you wish to speak in favor of the bylaw?
So we would like to have a paint booth in a building that we're developing right now, or is developed already. We already have an automotive repair shop adjacent to that property. We own both, the whole thing. I think it would be good for the area, also good for the town to have a small business come in and be able to house, being able to do that kind of work, because some of that area is getting consumed by larger companies. The facility is not any different than an automotive business. The risks, the parameters are pretty much the same. So we would like to see that approved in that building.
Thank you.
Okay, done?
Sure. Yeah, as long as you feel like you've had enough to say.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, and thank you for presenting. Is there anyone present who opposes the bylaw who wishes to speak? And I have Colin Huckstead on our list. If you wouldn't mind coming to the microphone, and then if you could spell your first and last name.
Hello, Colin Huckstead, C-O-L-I-N-H-U-X-T-E-D. Been a long time since I've been here. It's a nice change. So I got notified just last week. And first of all, I don't have any C-cans in town right now, but I've had lots over the years. I did some research on why they are dangerous, and I totally agree with the fire department. But I'm in 10 Bayside Place. I don't know how many years, but many years. We've had C-cans in there. We've never had any issues. But that place used to be an industrial lot. I bought it because it was an industrial park. And now we got some residents moving around. I talked to Megan yesterday and the day before. She's very helpful. But from what I understand, Bayside is the place you're going after mostly for the C-cans. They're all over in the other industrial parks. They're all over the place. But every C-can is ventilated, but not ventilated a lot. It's more for air pressure. The accident that we're all worried about, it was somebody storing chainsaws in there, and then the building next door burnt, and it heated up and it blew the door off meters away. I feel that this bylaw coming in and wanting me to change any of the C-cans that I have in place, and I don't have any there, but there may some come and some go, to put ventilation in every one of them doesn't make sense to me, because mine were all used to store paper towel, porta potties. We didn't store anything hazardous in them. And that's the bylaw you should be making, is that there isn't hazardous material to be kept in those things. I don't want it next door to me neither. Just a little point, those ships carry thousands of C-cans. I've been in the canal with a ship on each side of us with hundreds of C-cans on there, and they're transporting everything. And you don't hear a whole lot about it blowing up and causing issues. I know that people are there monitoring and looking after them, but so is a good business person. And we keep an eye on what we're doing. I suggest if you're gonna make a bylaw, that if you got hazardous material and you're gonna store them in a C-can, you put the proper ventilation. And I wouldn't have a problem with the town coming by or the town bylaw inspecting mine once a year. That's not an issue for me. Today I had some time to take a drive around. I heard the gentleman say that this has been out for quite a while for everybody to hear. I wasn't notified until last week when Megan contacted me. I don't know if I missed it all on Facebook or whether it's just hockey season and I wasn't paying attention, but I missed a lot of it. So I drove around to all the ones in Bayside today. I talked to probably 10 different owners in there. None of them were aware of it, and none of them want it. There's a couple that were really upset, and they feel it was a way overreach. And I feel like you're painting us all with the same brush. If there's people in there that are gonna be storing them and they're not safe, then fine them, go after them. But me full of paper towel and toilet paper and plastic sea cans and stuff, or plastic porta potties and stuff in there, isn't something I wanna be dealing with and cutting them open. When you put those vents in there, I'd have to lose a few pounds, but I could kick that vent door off and get through there. And that's a big reason why you have sea cans, is because they're secure. They keep people from breaking into them. There was a couple owners over there that were worried about it. They keep their concrete and other things that have to stay dry. So if you put those vents in there, they're gonna get moisture and then they have issues with that. What I propose is that the town gets the administration, set up a meeting, a few of us businessmen come in and sit down and try and negotiate a deal that works, and the fire department, that works and keeps everybody safe and everybody can do their things. There's a gentleman out of BC would have flown in here today if he'd have known more about it, but he has a problem with it. He has a mini storage, and he says the sea cans are every bit as safe as his storage units. I realize his storage units aren't built as strong, and when it does blow up, the walls fall off. These, they're worried about the doors flying out. But I would still like to meet with the town, the fire department, and put something through that works where nobody's upset. And it's mostly Bayview over there, and it's because we have a bunch of residents that have moved around us. And before that was an industrial lot. And we dealt with this about 15 years ago, the same thing. They didn't want us starting our trucks up any earlier than 8 o'clock in the morning. And we're wanting to push us out of there. And we did move out, but I still own the land. And if I want to find another buyer, or maybe I want to do something different, it's going to limit to me on how many sea cans I can bring in there. Sea cans come and go. They don't stay there. They're not permanent. Some people keep them there for a long time, but they're not permanent. They can be ordered to pick them up and get them out. But I just think that we could do a better job of communicating and getting together and sorting out something that works for all of us, not just make a law and then have people upset over it. And I know 10 people that'll sit and talk now, and there's more. But you're not just gonna have to deal with over there. Like on the south side, it's full of them. Like there's hundreds of sea cans in town. And if you're gonna try and force everybody to put vents and stuff in it, you're gonna have people uproared. And at this time, I don't have any, but I will, or may have. And that's about all I have to say. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Colin. Is there anyone present deemed to be affected by the bylaw who wishes to speak? And I have a gentleman named Kyle Wilson. Would you like to come to the microphone? And again, if you could spell your first and last name for the minutes. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening, Your Worship and Council. My name is Kyle Wilson, K-Y-L-E-W-I-L-S-O-N, and I'm the co-founder and operator of Beyond the Leaf Cannabis downtown, and we're located at 239 3rd Ave. My objective and goal here today is to let you know how my business is being affected by the current bylaw changes for the land use. I support recommended changes put forward. However, my business is at risk being affected for what's not currently included. I want to thank Jonathan and Megan for some advice on how to kind of roll out through this, but My concern and current advocacy is truly to raise an alarm and to get the attention of town council, to just get the attention of what's happening to the current industry as a whole, what's happening especially here in Alberta. And my goal is to be able to get your consideration for a little bit of change. Alberta is currently known as the loss leading price retailers of the industry, where margins are being driven so low it's unattainable to survive long term. And this is because we are seeing a dominance in cannabis retail stores spreading like wildfire that are backed by multi-billion-dollar corporations that have a predatory pricing approach that are driving margins so low and ultimately to be able to gain market share. And what they're doing is jacking up the prices once they've succeeded doing that. We're witnessing store closures all over the map. We're seeing mom and pa's close at a rapid rate. We're seeing publicly traded companies file for insolvency. And this is due to the fact that there is incredibly stiff competition. There's prices that are falling so low that it's cutting into margins. And the biggest one of all is oversaturation. The situation is so dire, it's being called a slow motion train wreck. Most retailers are struggling to be profitable, and we're starting to observe a trickle of closures on a weekly basis. And sadly, we've already seen one shop close here in town. I understand the strong stance the town must take towards economic development and growing our community. However, I do believe if dire situations occur in specific industries, that the town needs to take a look at the situation and look at options for economic sustainability. I'm hoping for the town's consideration to add some safeguards to help protect the existing ecosystem of the current cannabis retailers, in addition to also limit the exposure to our town's youth. In section 3.35 cannabis stores, the separation distance described in subsection 1B, 1C, and section 2, I propose to increase the distance to an additional 25 to 150 meters or more. In addition, I would like to propose the adding in subsection 1B 2 additional points to add a distance for public libraries, parks, and playgrounds, and most importantly, other cannabis stores. As a retailer here in town, the biggest fear that I have is that there's going to be too much competition and we're going to fail. I'm a believer in Murphy's Law as well, where anything can go wrong, it will. And with the fact that there's not a distance between public stores, there is a shop that can technically open up right next door to me and have the predatory pricing approach to shut us down. So again, my goal is to be able to raise the alarm. And I took these points actually from other municipalities as well. I've received the majority support from existing retailers here in town, and I've also received numerous signatures from local residents in support for my local proposal here as well. And this is what Megan recommended as well. Local social media has also been posting about what new businesses Strathmore wants to see as well. And new cannabis stores was not one of them. Ultimately, I want to thank the town for being so open and welcoming to our new industry. However, I believe it is time to take a look at the last 3.5 years of legalization, look at some of the lessons to be learned, and do what we can to protect the existing ecosystem of our local cannabis retailers. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. And at this point, we move on to questions of clarification from council. And sorry, Kyle, just before you leave, I have one question from myself for clarification. So the main concern you have is that there's nothing in the existing land use bylaw that deals with distances to other stores, and they could be in very close proximity to each other.
That's correct.
Is that the
yes.
main thrust then?
That's the main threat, yes.
Okay, thank
Absolutely.
you. Councillor Wiley.
No, I was confirming that too, but you had mentioned 2 other things. Would you mind repeating them, Kyle? There was, I think you gave 3 things in all that you were looking at.
So My proposal would be in subsection 1B, 1C, and section 2 to actually increase the distance that's already proposed to actually make it further away from schools, make it further away from existing healthcare, to future stores. So ultimately, if this would be pushed to the existing stores, out of that, we would be grandfathered in per se. And then adding to section 1B, a distance from public libraries, public parks, and playgrounds.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wiley, and thank you, Kyle. A question for administration. I know council has been listening quite intently to both Mr. Huckstead and Mr. Wilson and Mr. Ryan. So if any of them had any ideas to possibly amend what's being brought here tonight as a bylaw, I believe that might trigger another public hearing. Would that happen?
Thank you, Your Worship. If it's something new other than that's in the amending bylaw, it may trigger a public hearing. We can debate that further later in the agenda when we get to the item, but we have to be very careful of what ways we amend this current bylaw, but that doesn't mean that council can't direct administration to research further into some items in the LUB.
So,
Sorry, Mayor,
Yeah.
just further to that, I mean, if there are amendments tonight, if we can do them in a timely manner, we can recess and step out for 10 minutes, but you need the full text amendment before you to pass the bylaws. So if it's something that's a matter of a few minutes to do, I would suggest council recess and administration can do that. But if it's something that takes longer, you can't pass the bylaw tonight.
right, and so if councillors are kind of, I guess, if they're swayed by some of the things that were said and they have some questions about the bylaw, would the procedure be to defeat the bylaw or just make a recommendation that this be brought back to us at a later date? What's the best path forward if that arises with our councillors? Taking into effect Mr. Wilson's information here about the cannabis retail places, as well as Mr. Huckstead's comments that there are many business owners who would like to get together with our administration, CAO, and staff. So do you understand what I'm asking, Jonathan? What's the best path forward? Do we defer this and ask for more information and for staff to meet on this issue with prospective interested people?
Your Worship, it really depends on the nature of the question. If it is something that's within this amending bylaw that council may have questions for, need further review of, it may be worth putting it up for third reading, and then if it passes, it passes. If it doesn't, it doesn't. If it's something though separate, then it might be worth directing administration to bring a report back to council if that's answering your question.
Okay, thank you. And I don't want to try to lead councillors in a certain direction or not, but I'm just looking forward. If the bylaw were to be defeated tonight, it's a 6-month waiting period before it can come back to us?
For the specific bylaw.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Councillor Langmaid.
Your Worship, I just have a question for administration. Would tabling the bylaw to a future meeting not be a potential route that we could possibly look into if for some reason this makes it to that point tonight?
Through the mayor,
Another strategy?
council can always table third reading to a future meeting, but you have to be careful how you're going to get information in the future too after the public hearing. Once the public hearing closes, we have to be very careful of the type of information we're accepting.
Okay, so following Councillor Langmaid's questions, if we were to table it and then these groups came together to meet with our admin, then we would have to have a new bylaw crafted?
Yeah, because the whole purpose of a public hearing is just fairness. So you would want to make sure that everybody here has that opportunity to either voice their support or their opposition to the bylaw. And once we close the public hearing, we have to be careful that we don't accept other information that may sway how council may vote on the third reading.
Okay, so the motion, a potential motion to table it until more information could actually be more problematic than another method.
Thank you, Your Worship. If you were to table it, it would be until June 1st for council to maybe further reflect on the public hearing and the information that was given here. But we wouldn't be able to bring more information back in time for third reading, if that
So
makes sense.
that would limit our administration from even being able to meet with business people because they'd be gaining brand new information. And okay, thank you. I just want to make sure we follow the correct procedures. Any other questions from any other councillors? Then at this time, thank you, Kyle, for being able to answer those questions, and thank you for being here tonight. To all of you who came and spoke tonight, we appreciate it. So at this time, the public hearing for bylaw 22-01, being a bylaw to amend land use bylaw number 14-11, is closed at 6:31 p.m. Now, as far as public comments, we have no one registered to ask any questions from the public. However, are there any members of the public who are present who wish to comment on an item on the agenda? So it doesn't have to just deal with this land use amending bylaw, but if you have any comments on some of the items that are on the agenda that you might have received or that you've seen. And seeing and hearing none, we'll move on. We have no delegations tonight. So we move on to item 6. We have no consent agenda. And that brings us to 7, the confirmation of minutes. Regular council meeting minutes for May 4th, 2022. Councillor Peterson?
Your Worship, I would move that council adopt the May 4th, 2022 regular council meeting minutes as presented.
Thank you for the motion. All in favor? And that motion is carried. That brings us to item 8, business. 8.1, Town of Strathmore Strategic Plan 2022 to 2025. And I believe that is on page 187 of your handout. And just to get us started and to introduce Jonathan, Jonathan's going to come forward and present the strategic plan for the next, you're going to just bring an introduction to it, I believe? Sure. And the strategic plan is a chance for the town to map out a vision or it's almost like a roadmap for the next years of our term, things we want to accomplish, things that are part of the vision, part of the scope of what we've created. And we do have a bit of a presentation for you tonight. It's also in agenda packages. Did you want me to speak to any of it, Jonathan? Okay, let me just get my pages up. Sure.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council. So today we have the 2022-2025 Town of Strathmore Strategic Plan in front of you. This is the culmination of a process that's taken a couple of months now, dating back to March when Council first started reviewing the potential strategic plan. Before you, we have the strategic plan, and included in the strategic plan are some of the elements of the corporate business plan as well, just for ease of reading and clarification.
Thank you. And I know some people in the public they aren't aware of the things that we do as a council to try to create this roadmap for the future planning and the future development of Strathmore. But this council had a weekend strategic planning retreat here in town, and we worked on our various priorities. So as a council, we've identified 6 areas which we hope to focus on with our administration and staff help for the next part of our term. And the six priority areas are as follows. We have affordable living, and these aren't in any particular order. Affordable living, we want to ensure that Strathmore is an affordable community for residents. and that would allow people to have access to housing, services, and supports. Thank you, Jonathan. We make a good team, an impromptu team. Perfect. And our second priority area is financial sustainability. We want to ensure that Strathmore provides predictable and stable tax rates that reduce overall town debt. We also hope to build more financial reserves, maintain existing town assets, and plan for a managed growth. One of the things we've talked about, and all of us are concerned, obviously, we all live in town as well. Everyone's always concerned about property taxes, both non-residential and residential. It's very difficult for a municipality to have 0% tax increases and still move the town forward and provide services and new things for our residents. So one of our focuses was to have predictable and stable tax rates. Our third one is intentional community development. And Strathmore plans to create communities for its residents and with its neighbors, Siksika Nation and Wheatland County, institutional partners, which can all then promote sustainable and interdependent family-friendly spaces. So we want Strathmore to be a family-friendly place for not just Strathmore residents, but those we deal with on a regular day-to-day basis who may not live right in town. Our third priority area is climate resiliency, including environmental stewardship. Obviously, in today's age, we are all concerned about the climate and climate change and the environment. Strathmore hopes to protect and plans to manage and enhance its local environment while preparing for future challenges due to climate change. You know, a simple example is the use of solar panels. We did install solar panels on the roof of this building to help generate electricity. We've leased the southern lands to Capital Power to have solar energy create and convert solar light into energy that will go into the grid. So we are looking at things like that to improve our approach to climate. Our fifth priority area was economic development, and we want to make sure that Strathmore is well positioned to encourage commercial and industrial economic development with a focus on sustainable growth. And again, we have big projects like the solar farm. Our staff and administration have been working really hard for months on another issue, and we're optimistic that that's going to come about, and we know that we want to improve the economic situation of Strathmore as well for our residents too. Employment, economy, all that is something that's on this plan. And the last priority we have is community wellness. Strathmore plans and wants to value community wellness focused on the maintenance, protection, and improvement of services that support optimum lifestyles. Couple of examples, we have a very active and thriving and very approachable FCSS department who really do a lot to help vulnerable families, seniors who need some social supports and need some help in situations. We've also made it a priority in the last 12 years to really focus on building more and more pathways. And we found that during the COVID situation of the past couple of years, people needed recreational opportunities that were affordable, and since so many places were closed, walking, cycling, rollerblading, in my case, waddling, became very important for people to get out and do some recreational activities. So that's a part of wellness that we feel is a priority. I believe I've covered all of them. And Jonathan, what do you think we should, as far as proceeding further, as far as the strategic plan? I mean, we have this presentation. Do we need to do any more with that? It's been included in the agenda. This will also be available via our communications department as well, won't it? So tonight in this meeting, we are looking as a council to potentially approve this. And I guess we can have any comments or questions from councillors for Jonathan or our administration. First of all, thank you all for being a part of our retreat here in town when we did all this strategic planning. It was the It was the best retreat I've ever been to. We were focused. We had I think we had some great ideas. We worked well as a brand new team together, and we came up with some really solid ideas that are, I think, going to do some really good things for the residents of Strathmore and help people. Any comments from councillors? Oh, sorry, Councillor Wiley, I didn't see your red light.
I'm just not sure about the order of things, so I have an amendment I'd like to make. Should it be the motion put forward first and then I add the amendment, or should I make a motion with the amendment?
That's a good question, Jonathan. What do you think is the best path forward?
Through the mayor, ultimately, Councillor Wiley, it'll be up to you. If you're comfortable making a motion to adopt the strategic plan with the amendment, you may. And then council may vote on that at that time.
Sure, I'll let the rest of council know it's on page 203 of the package. And it's about our financial sustainability, and it talks about predictable and appropriate tax increases. I'm just looking for an addition to the measuring, how we're going to measure that. If it says something like appropriate, I mean, there's no good way to measure it, but Jonathan's helped me come up with an amendment that at least would mean perhaps on an annual basis, we would get a report comparing ourselves to other similar municipalities. So if you want to see the exact wording of the amendment, I sent an email out earlier, but I can read it to you as well. So it would go under measuring progress. It would add, under measuring progress, tax rates, debt, and operating cost per capita and provincial debt limit will be comparable to similar municipalities. And again, it would be some type of report from administration, just so we can, at least on an annual basis, see where we are. So I'll put forward the motion for that, and then council can debate on it. So I move that council adopt the Town of Strathmore Strategic Plan 2022 to 2025 as amended to include tax rates, debt and operating cost per capita, and provincial debt rate limit will be comparable to similar municipalities under measuring progress on page, and it should say 15 of the strategic plan.
Thank you for that motion. And now for discussion on the motion, Councillor Wiley, Councillor Langmaid.
Did I grow? He's very tall. We don't look anything alike.
He is very tall.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I do have one question for Councillor Wiley regarding this amendment, and that's regarding specifically the portion that mentions the provincial debt limit, which I understand is actually prescribed by the province. We have our own internal limits that are lower than that limit, but I'm wondering how measuring the current provincial debt limit that's prescribed by legislation would be an appropriate measure. Thank you.
Maybe I can help with this one through the chair. So the provincial debt limit is you're right, established, and municipalities establish their internal limits, which are typically below that. But different, the municipalities establish different internal limits, whereas the provincial limit is relative to a percentage, right? So this would be, relative to that percentage being set. So it does allow a bit more of an across the board, because obviously bigger communities have bigger budgets and smaller communities have smaller budgets. But when you take it on that percentage basis, it will, and that data is readily available on the Municipal Affairs website.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just a little, the wording makes it, I understand when you explain it to me. The way it's worded maybe doesn't come across that way. Overall, I think it's a minor issue. It's not a hill that I'm willing to die on here. It was just something that I noticed in the amendment that I thought that didn't jive with me. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Langmaid, and thank you for the clarification, CAO Scoble. Councillor Peterson.
My question, thank you, Mayor. My question is in the same line, and under the measuring progress section on the page noted by Councillor Wiley, we talk about a measuring point being tax-supported debt ratio. And some of what Councillor Wiley is referencing falls into this category as well, I'm assuming.
Yes, I believe that would be kind of Councillor Wiley's motion would replace that if council approved it. So it's kind of adding on to it with the
CAO School, you have a huge amount of knowledge in this particular area. Can you describe how you would measure tax-supported debt ratio in relation to both what Councillor Wiley is speaking about and what our gaps might be, and what a tax-supported ratio would actually measure?
Well, tax-supported debt ratio would be really how we're, I guess, what percentage of our operating and our capital that we are funding by debt relative to the other sources, which would be, again, investments from, for reserves, which are in the form of investments. Basically, your three cash flows are operating, financing, and investments, right? So this is really the ratio of the financing to all the inflows of cash into the town.
So my understanding is that Councillor Wiley wants to enhance this measuring process by saying, how do we stack up against like communities? And that would be quite easy to do, relatively easy.
Yes, so on the Alberta Municipal Affairs site, they have a municipal measurement index.
Yeah.
And it looks at all communities across Alberta relative to their size, their budget, various factors. And then, so what you can do is, for the town of Strathmore, you can actually pick good comparators, okay comparators, and poor comparators. Exactly. So, good comparators aren't necessarily our neighbors, right? They're communities like Sylvan Lake, which are very similar in size and
Beaumont.
Demographics and stuff like that. Yeah. So the question is, do you want to compare to good comparators, or do you want to compare to our neighbors? Because, we are within that Calgary, I guess, economic region, right, as well. So you could do both if you want, but you just have to be careful which ones you're picking, and make sure they're in the right bin, because to compare ourselves to Airdrie or Okotoks is not a good comparison in some respects, but in other respects it is a good comparison because they're close by.
So this is my concern with the amendment, because who you choose to come into that realm can be in itself a manipulative measure.
If I could piggyback on your idea, for example, I have a little bit of concern. I have a little bit of concern about comparing the percentage of property tax rates between communities, because a property tax rate is a snapshot of what you've done or what you're planning to do. So, for example, if you have a city like Chestermere that cancels a major field house and civic center, and they had planned for a larger tax increase, and it's canceled, then they have a smaller tax increase. And compared to us, we might have a capital project that could involve a bit of a property tax increase. But when you just compare the tax rates between the communities, it doesn't really explain how or why they are the way they are, because each municipality is completely individual as far as what it's trying to accomplish. A lot of people don't know that Chestermere doesn't have any of its own recreation facilities. It has an arena that's owned by by Rocky View County, whereas the town of Strathmore has a ton of amenities. We have a lot of recreation facilities that belong to the town of Strathmore, and Councillor Mitzner has been really involved in getting us to really look at the assets the town has. So I'm a little cautious about comparing tax rates, because it doesn't fully give the explanation as to why High River might have a high tax rate and ours is a low one. That kind of thing has a bit of a worry for me.
Your Worship, following up, I don't want to give up on Councillor Wiley's ideas, because I think that he's talking about accountability, and I think that there's ways to always be more accountable. And what could we look at in terms of how we stack up, not just against like municipalities, but what about across the province? Can we look at other measures under this tax-supported debt ratio, like what percentage of our money is spent on recreation? What percentage of the money that we bring in is spent on staffing? And those things that are pretty consistent throughout, are there measurements in that area that would make sense, that would let our public see how we stack up against other communities, that would not prejudice us, or neither would it allow any, this council or any future council to manipulate in such a way that you look better than maybe you are. Is there some other measurement process that we could bring into this?
Through the chair, so, you know, 3 of the 4 measurements in Councillor Wiley's motion are standardized across the province for any town. So the debt ratio, the debt per capita, and the operating cost per capita. So those are very easy to retrieve for any community across Alberta that we desire to. Any municipality, I think there's 344 of them. We can compare to any one of those, or as many as we want. When you get into things like the recreation and that, it's certainly doable, but it's just the administration will have to go out and mine that data, right? They'll have to look at annual reports or annual budgets of whatever communities you want us to look at, and then try and extract that and or have a discussion with the administrators in those communities. Of course, not everybody reports their data the same way, and that's, you know, like I said, 3 of the 4, that's a standardized approach that is published by the province based on the annual reports we submit every year to the province of Alberta, so that's easy. Anything's doable. I'm just saying it's a little, just takes the degree of complexity and resources up a bit if you want to look at things outside of what's published on the province of Alberta website.
So to conclude, Your Worship, if 3 out of the 4 of Councillor Wiley's amendments are already included under the tax-supported debt ratio, maybe we don't need the amendment. Thank you.
Councillor Wiley.
I'm really hoping council will support this amendment tonight because it will give us a chance, hopefully on an annual basis, to just have this conversation and see where we stack up and compare and have, you know, maybe a tough conversation once a year. So I'm really hoping it can be added to our progress, or our measuring progress.
Thank you, Councillor Wiley. The only one that I would have difficulty with, again, is comparing our property tax rates, because it doesn't necessarily explain why the property tax rates are different between us and a high river. So I couldn't support the amendment with the percentage, the tax rate being used as a comparison without lengthy explanations or riders that would explain why the percentage rates are different. Our property tax rate increase this year is pretty low, and we're looking at a variety of things moving forward with that. But I just don't feel that comparing the tax rates gives a fulsome image or a report as to why they're different. Councillor Wiley.
Yet I think that's the piece of information that most taxpayers in town would most like to have. So I think it would be worth the conversation.
Okay, and I guess my comment again to that would be, it may create controversy and people being upset when they look at the tax rates between us and Chestermere, for example, but they don't know why the property tax rates are so different. And so I just think it invites a situation where people make comparisons without full information as to why they could be different. I know we're always looking for property tax rates that are affordable for residents, and we want to be competitive with other communities, but having the report doesn't necessarily show why the property tax rate. I mean, maybe we need a new enforcement building where we would combine fire and enforcement all in one major building near a highway, and our property tax rate goes up quite a bit, and people are okay with it because it's a much needed facility. But when we report that, you know, people would see, well, it's 8% versus High River is 2%, and then they could be upset, but they don't know the full reason why it's at 8%. I hope I'm making sense. Councillor Langmaid.
And thank you very much, Your Worship. I share similar concerns as have already been detailed by other councillors, but also with the addition of the opposite point of view of what would it mean if the comparable towns to us are actually much higher or higher? What if we are one of the lowest? Would that mean that our measurement is poor because we're not comparable, because we are the lowest? And or could be the lowest at some point, and just that idea that comparable is very, as has been discussed, comparable is subjective, and it's very difficult when we're talking about measurements. From my perspective, I want a measurement to be quantifiable, something that I can point at and be like, this is math. But because of the subjective nature of comparisons, I'm not sure that I could look at that and be able to put my finger on it and say, yes, this is the final conclusion of whether we are, we're measuring success or not. So I understand and appreciate where the motion is coming from, and I think the intention behind it is absolutely worthy. But just that measurement there, because of the subjective nature of it, I'm not sure I could support the amendment with that specific measurement in it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Langmaid. Are there any more comments or discussion points on the motion brought forward by Councillor Wiley? Councillor Wegener?
Yeah, I'm kind of on the fence with this one, but I mean, I think it does make some sense myself. And I believe I heard CAO Scoble said with the comparison that they could do some drilling down and digging in to find out what the various municipalities were doing as far as their tax rate and that. Is that something that may work? Give a detailed explanation of the I guess of all the metrics used in comparison with other municipalities.
Thank you, Councillor Wegener. Councillor Mitzner?
I think our consideration should be to our community specific. There are no apples to apples, and so I will not support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mitzner. If there are no further questions, we have a motion to amend the strategic plan. And I'll call the question. All in favor of the amendment to the motion? Sorry, I didn't see everyone. All in favor? Okay, opposed? So the motion is defeated. So at this time, we would need a new motion. Councillor Peterson?
Your worship, I would move that council adopt the Town of Strathmore 2022 to 2025 strategic plan as presented in attachment 1.
Thank you for that motion. And now we have a new motion on the floor. Is there discussion on that motion? Councillor Wiley?
So I do want to make it clear, and I'm sure every councillor sitting here has a similar idea. It's not a perfect strategic plan. I have concerns with some of the items in the strategic plan, but I generally agree with the direction that the council has outlined in this plan, and I will be supporting the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Wiley. Any other comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? And the motion is carried. Thank you all. That was a good discussion. We move now to 8.2 West Mountain Highway 1 Utility Projects Budget Amendment, which is found on page 212. Ethan, you're presenting tonight, and good evening. We have Ethan Wilson with us here.
Good evening, Your Worship and Council. I will try and make this as quick as I can. I'm here to talk to you tonight about two of our capital projects. We've got our Westmount Utility Project, and then we have got what we currently know as our Ridge Road Project, but Highway 1 will make more sense here in a couple of minutes. So quick outline, I'll go through the background of the Ridge Road and what was originally approved in the capital budget, and then I'll give you our proposed solution. Again, with the Westmount Main, I'll go through the same thing, what was originally proposed in the solution, go through a bit of budget, and then finally the recommendation. So the Ridge Road Storm Sewer Project is part of our downtown stormwater strategy. With the current stormwater master plan, this project would have been phase 1 of a 3-phase project, which would allow stormwater along 4th Street, 3rd Ave, and 5th Ave to be collected and conveyed out of downtown. With completion of the first phase, this would allow for future projects to proceed, which would provide stormwater infrastructure along with other necessary upgrades at that time to about 2.5 blocks of the downtown area. And I've highlighted it here just to make it visual. As this project was reviewed with our consultant team and the details of the previous events of flooding that have occurred around Highway 1 were shared, it was quickly determined that Highway 1 stormwater crossing may be a much more significant concern and that we should address that first. We wanted to bring attention to that before any further stormwater loading was added to the system. So we did some modeling. With that, you can see that the area affected is actually quite large for that portion of town. Not only the areas north of the highway, but also those south of the highway where this stormwater is then discharged. So following the modeling, a new alignment was created. Originally, the plan was to connect to what currently exists in Wheatland Trail. Rather, the direction is to go around to the east. What was identified was a new crossing of Highway 1. This is a new dual or twin 900 millimeter culvert. This would avoid and reduce the amount of infrastructure that town has within the Alberta transportation right-of-way and get rid of that risk of flooding fairly substantially. So as such, the infrastructure department is proposing that the project funds and scope focus on this Highway 1 crossing at this time. The adjustment is still the first step in getting stormwater infrastructure to the downtown area identified, while also addressing an operational issue that we currently have. The costs of this option do vary from the original budget. However, we have been able to secure some funding from Alberta Transportation to help pay for that. And then our other project, the Westmount Main Upsizing. So this project is part of the water master servicing study and was partially completed with the Westridge Road project. What remains are pieces on either end of last year's project, and it currently exists, or currently there are 200 millimeter and 250 millimeter pipes, and the plan was to upsize all of them to 300 millimeters to create that kind of continuous southern trunk. The design for this project has been completed for the entire segment, so we can proceed to construction at any time now. However, we are suggesting that we focus only on those within Wheatland Trail. So the materials, the age, and the size of the pipes throughout this route vary considerably. The oldest and smallest pipe is along Wheatland Trail, and in this case, that one is asbestos concrete pipe. That, of course, comes with proper removal and disposal actions compared to other cast iron or PVC pipes. The remainder of this route is at least 250 millimeters in diameter, and in many cases it's PVC pipe, which has an expected lifespan of 50 years, some suggesting many more than that. And so we're hesitant to replace pipe that's in perfectly good condition, although slightly undersized. So with this information, we've asked the design team to put together a tender package for only the 200 millimeter AC pipe, and then that we would do further studies after that installation to confirm that upsizing to 300 on the rest of that line is actually required before we start spending money to replace perfectly good pipe. The 300 millimeter water main along Wheatland Trail, we are proposing to also realign it. We would push it over to the far northbound lane. This has a couple of effects. It brings us out of a main area of that roadway to limit our traffic impacts, but it also reduces the need of taking that asbestos concrete pipe out of the ground. So we'll only remove the portions that we need to, and then we'll properly abandon the rest in place. We are still working with Alberta Transportation on approval of this, and we're quite confident that that will happen, but that's the proposal that we've made to them. So we'll look at costs, and just to give you a heads up, the costs between writing this report, putting it on the agenda, and today have changed. So the most up-to-date information is on the screen. I'll point out where it has changed from what you have in the package. But so the original budget for this project was $434,000. Our cost, which is confirmed through a tender submission, is $552,000. We had conversations with Alberta Transportation because this is their right-of-way. They originally built the culvert and all of that. And from that, to much of our surprise, we were given the go-ahead that they would fund up to $200,000 or 1/3 of the construction costs. So that gives us, based on the construction cost, $148,000 from Alberta Transportation, which gives us a small buffer of about $30,000. For the Westmount Main upsizing project, and this is the one that's changed from your package, we had an approved budget of $790,000. Just yesterday, tender closed on the Wheatland Trail portion, and that came back at $655,000. So that was higher than we were expecting. That gives us a budget surplus in general of $135,000, but because this project is funded through levies, we cannot use that money for anything else. So the free cash available or additional budget that's available is $40,000. So quick side-by-side comparison. But when I originally wrote this report, we actually were short budget on one project and had substantially more left over. We've since balanced that out a bit and have a small of surplus on both. So what I'm coming to council today with is I'm asking for approval to proceed with these changed scopes as I've presented them tonight. And then I'm also asking for the flexibility because of the risk involved with crossing Highway 1 that if there is the need to transfer the surplus from one to the other, that we are able to do that. So happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Councillor Mitzner.
When you say crossing highway number 1, is there not excavation where you can go under the highway without disrupting anything?
Yes, so through the chair to you, Councillor Missner, we are planning to auger bore that, so essentially there will be no closure of the road. You might see the shoulders closed just for safety of the construction workers, but that would be bored under the highway and not a closure or an open excavation or anything like that.
Well, Jamie and Ethan, I'm always impressed that you and your department find ways to do these huge projects and keep the town moving and still be very efficient in your use of the dollars and pennies that we seem to be, well, obviously need, and your work with the provincial government to get some money is also very commendable. My only question to you is, and I understand that since you did the report, it's changed, so there's less of a surplus. If those two surpluses or those two, if that money that's a surplus is not fully needed, where does that wind up going then if there's left over from the surplus and you've shifted some to that other project?
Your worship, the surplus would just go back into, being unspent, and at the end of the year when things are reconciled, depending on many factors, it may get used for something else through council's approval. It may not get borrowed if that's the source of it. There's many things, but it wouldn't get spent without council's approval.
Thank you. I just wanted to get that out there for the public. And again, kudos to both of you and your department, because this is a good news story. And in these times of supply chain problems and skyrocketing costs on a lot of things, as I said, this is a good news story for these two major projects that we desperately need. Councillor Peterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. You're being very kind. I was thinking when I was reading this report when it came out last week, that this is why even though engineers are very difficult, we really need them. And I'm so appreciative, I'm so very appreciative of this report as somebody who lives in the downtown south and has watched in the last 3 succeeding years that flooding getting worse and worse and worse, and the damages escalating, and the struggles to maintain existing infrastructure, and the challenges to businesses have been increasingly difficult. And then you hear about 200 millimeters of rain falling in an atmospheric river, and you think about, climate warming and that becoming a bigger issue even, that it's not something that's going away. So I'm really appreciative of this solution, very supportive of the motion that's come before council, and I really echo the mayor's comments. I really am glad that you've brought this forward in this way. And I think the priority setting is really smart.
Thank you, Councillor Peterson. I have Councillor Mitzner.
With the construction on 817, has there been any conversations with the government in reference to widening or resurfacing that roadway?
Your worship, through the chair, we of course would be paving the portion that we would be digging up, but we have not broached those conversations about further paving, and I don't believe they have any short-term plans for paving through Strathmore. We can offer our contractor to do that, but I think that's probably the most we could do.
Can we ask the government?
We can always bring it up in a conversation. That doesn't hurt anything.
Thank you.
Thank you. So if there's no further comments, all we need is a motion. Councillor Wiley.
I would like to move that council approve the reallocation of non-levy surplus funds from the Westmount Main Upsizing Project to the Ridge Road Storm Sewer Project to allow for the modified scope of both projects to proceed to construction.
Thank you for the motion. Is there any further discussion or comments on that motion? Seeing and hearing none, all in favor? Oh, Councillor Wiley, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, and I know this has already been stated twice, but I just think for anyone listening at home, for them to appreciate, that the planning department has taken two huge projects and found a way to move both of them forward despite the market conditions in a financially responsible way. So this is a very good news story for everybody. So kudos to you guys, and I'm done.
Thank you. I'll call the question. All in favor? And that motion is carried. We move now to 8.3, Fire Department Level of Service Policy. And I believe we have Chief Sturgeon here as well as Deputy Chief Owl. Good evening, gentlemen, and welcome. Good evening. We look forward to your presentation.
Good evening. Thank you for having us. So I've invited, through your worship, so I've invited Baz, Owl, and Captain Eric Alexander, as I don't have all the history of the department. So if there's any questions about the history and potential things that we did do in the past and we're looking at not doing now, they could answer those questions or just some added insight for you. So I'll just start. I think it's worthwhile just to go through the summary portion of the report, just for anybody that may be watching and for council, just to understand kind of how we got to this point. So in Q1 of 2022, the fire department underwent an internal review with help from a consultant to deep dive in the 5 areas: administration, operations, health and safety, training, and infrastructure. Through this process, it was identified that the town's policy level of service should be refined to ensure the fire department's operations and training are focused and aligned with council's expectations, and that the public understands what the fire department's capabilities are. So that's a big portion of that with the public. It seems that there's some misnomers about exactly what we do and what we respond to and how it's done. So when we looked at this policy and each level of service, we asked ourselves various questions. Those questions were, did we have the right equipment, or is there equipment that was needed? Are there sufficient staffing levels to carry out the proposed level of service and support these programs? Is there sufficient training in place to support these programs? And is training on these programs attainable for all personnel, full-time and volunteer? And then obviously the infrastructure. Is the program required with current hazards? Will the program be supported by our current assets that we already have? We would not need to purchase any additional. So this policy before you today reflects a realistic benchmark for the fire department to meet while striving to reduce the unnecessary burden to ratepayers and ensure the delivery of high quality response for all hazards within the town of Strathmore. So it's to be noted that in the past, I think the fire department's been trying to do too much with too little. So they've been trying to do everything they can with not all the proper resources. So emphasis needs to be put on the training and allocation of assets to protect town property and the interests of the town. So that's my summary of the report. Obviously, it deep dives into what was changed in the report, and I can answer any questions or I can go further into those changes should you require those.
Thank you for your presentation, Chief Sturgeon. Are there questions or comments from council? Councillor Peterson.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for this report. I really appreciate it. One of the things that I wondered as I went through, for whatever reason, I don't know whether I'm just more conscious of it or maybe it's actually happening, and that is that there appears to be an increase in fatalities and fires recently, particularly in the large urbans, and even an increase here in fires, although, you know, we've been very fortunate to not have any fatalities. But one of the things that I looked at when I was here, and I'm not sure if it's addressed, and it just hasn't gelled with me, was the opportunity for our firefighters to engage in professional development in terms of new strategic initiatives. And so I didn't really see it specifically. I assume that you think about that all the time, about, you know, new technology. I remember one of our sons trained with your fire department before he moved away, and I remember him you know, coming home with ideas and discussions about new initiatives, you know, in terms of, you know, messaging in behind the screens, you know, 3D messaging in behind the screens, and better communication in the ground in difficult buildings, and talking about strategy around using different kind of air camera, whether, you know, whatever strategies that they come in. And I'm wondering if there's allowances for your department to engage in that kind of work. And I also know that in the Alberta Innovates program that's on site in Edmonton but exists everywhere, there are firefighters that are really innovating, in that realm. And that's my question, is that something that you're able to incorporate, or is that something that you need support for going forward?
So great question. So through your worship to Councillor Peterson. So to answer your question, that's something obviously we think about on a daily basis. I think in the last, even 5-10 years, the fire service has progressed exponentially in technology and just the way we do things. Things that were done in the past that were unsafe that we just don't do anymore. We really put the emphasis on protecting the first responders, their health and safety, their mental stability, their mental safety, their mental health, their families. That's all part of everything we do every single day. Every time we make decisions, we think about all those things. It's noted in one of the sections is our response priorities, and it talks a little bit about first responder life safety. And with that life safety, that's the statement, but it's a broader sense of their safety. So it's their mental health, it's their physical health, and everything that goes along with that. In 2 weeks from now, I'm taking the 2 captains and the deputy chief to the Alberta Fire Chiefs Conference. So we're trying to network a little bit more. Obviously, with COVID, it was tough, and I don't know what happened in the past. But definitely one of my priorities is to get out into other communities, get out with manufacturers, get out with the accreditation departments, things like that. The NFPA, we've signed up for memberships with them. They're the ones the National Fire Protection Association, that governs basically everything we do. They do best practices, and WorkSafe follows their best practices for the most part. So we're really trying to get out there, and I think it's just a matter of building on those steps and slowly doing that. And we also have to be careful that we don't just accept new technology. We need to make sure it's tested and that it makes sense for our town and our department specifically. So there's probably 1,000 gimmicks out there, and we may only use 100 of them because they make sense for us.
Speaking of gimmicks, do you have a drone?
We do not have a drone, though.
Would a drone be useful? The reason I ask, Fire Chief, is that I saw some projects out of the STEM research in some of the Eastern Canadian universities that were sponsoring projects with local fire departments. I don't know if it exists out of the University of Calgary or Edmonton, but I just thought that it would be a really neat testing environment to see if drones were useful to launch, especially now that we have full-time firefighters that could man them and send them out.
Yeah, I think at this point where we're at, I think it's probably something on our radar. I don't think it's something that we would adopt in the next year or 2 years. I think there's a lot of things that we have to get right first before we get there. And right now we're really focusing on the basics and building our capacity. And I think those things will definitely come, and I think there's probably a need for it in the future. And there's days where sure that would make life easier, but I think we need to just narrow our focus on what we do, make sure we do it really well, and then add something else, and not try and do everything all at once. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Peterson and Chief Sturgeon. Mark, did you want to weigh in too?
Yes, Your Worship, and through council, I'm not sure if they're aware, and Chief Sturgeon's still relatively new, but the infrastructure department does have a drone that could be utilized in many capacities. Municipal enforcement has used it in the past. Obviously, infrastructure has for a lot of their projects. So maybe that's something that could be utilized in the future.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Wagoner?
Yeah, just a couple of things here. So again, thank you for this. And again, the level of service report makes sense. Get rid of the stuff that you don't do and focus on the stuff that you do a lot. Just a couple of questions, though. During the life safety and fire prevention, it talks about inspections and that. And I think I've asked this before, but can the inspections be monetized to recoup some of your costs? Because if I'm correct, you'll go out and do fire inspections on retail stores, on commercial buildings and that. So I just wondering if there's a way that that can be monetized so you can recoup some of your costs.
Sure. Through your worship to Councillor Wagner, to answer your question, absolutely, inspections can be monetized. I think it's probably a broader question between council and how that could be set out. We are mandated through our quality management plan, so it's with Safety Codes Alberta and on the type of inspections that we do. So at last count, maybe Baz can help me on total amount of inspections.
Yeah, I think we inspect around 300 premises within the town.
Yeah, so that's what we're doing already, and we're looking at possibly modifying some lower risk things, just because trying to build the capacity to get out there and do those things, and maybe do some more education around inspections. But I think for the most part, it would be an opportunity to probably fund a broader program that would in turn help the business owners really understand. Because what I find in the inspections I've been involved in is that they just don't know what they don't know. So until you tell them, they just don't know they're supposed to be doing it. And unless you catch it on that specific day, you may never tell them, right? So I think by more education and building out our inspection program, we can educate the business owners. And I think in turn that will help the whole community.
Okay, thank you. Another one, investigation services. So the fire department will ensure all fires resulting in a loss are investigated for cause and origin. Do you guys have on the department qualified investigators?
I'll take that question. Yes, through your worship to Councillor Wagner, yes, we do have qualified individuals that are NFPA 921 certified to do fire investigations. I am one of those individuals for the town. And if we lack the capacity, we also have contract personnel we could use. And if I can go back to your previous question, currently there is no charge for inspections. As Chief Surgeon said, our focus first is on education. A lot of folks, a lot of businesses aren't aware of what's required under the fire code. Yeah. So our first goal is to educate. If we have to go back and deficiencies still exist under the fees bylaw, there is a charge for that going back. If they're not willing to work and remedy the situation, then there is a charge on the current fees bylaw, which seems to be working.
Okay, thank you. And just one more here. Under your key changes to the policy here, it says refine 13.0 motor vehicle collision response to include billing for all motor vehicle collisions in town. Are you currently not billing for motor vehicle accidents in town?
Yes, so to your worship, to Councillor Wagner. So in the past, I haven't found any record of billing for MVAs in town. So we do bill on the highway response. So we bill Alberta Transportation, and in turn, they bill back to the insurance provider. So it'd be the same process that we do in town. So I think that's definitely, and I know as a best practice throughout the province, I would say from my estimates and talking around and just previous knowledge that 90% plus bill for MVAs within town. So I think it's a prudent thing to do. What happens with that billing is that both parties, if it's two parties involved, both get 50% of that bill, and then it's up to, that goes straight to the insurance provider, and then it's up to the insurance provider to subrogate whatever they want to do after to pay if they're not at fault. So we don't deem fault, we just bill them both the same amount, and then it's up to the insurance companies to deem the fault and go after the amount of money that they want from the other company.
Okay, thank you. And again, thank you guys for everything. That's all I have.
Thank you, Councillor Wegener. Councillor Mitzner.
I just have a question because we're all here at the same time. Is there an option for community engagement and awareness for us to have like a hazardous goods drop-off like they have in the city for a weekend where people can bring their paint cans, bring their explosives, bring all that kind of stuff? I don't remember ever having one in Strathmore. Old propane tanks, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, it might not be the correct term, sorry.
So, to your worship, to answer Councillor Mitzner's question, so hopefully they don't bring their ordinance to us, but definitely there could be the opportunity to do that. I know we're just in the infancy stage of going to start to receive fire extinguishers from residents. So we're just starting to build that program, and they can just drop them off and we'll dispose of them. And so we can look at expanding that or possibly do roundup days. I know that our recycling facility already receives paint cans, I believe, but there may be some opportunity for some other things, and we could probably get in touch with, I forget the waste management company's name, but get in touch with them and see what they do and see if we can't fill in some gaps there and talk to the other cities on how they do that. So, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Mitzner. Councillor Peterson.
Your worship, are you ready to entertain a motion?
Yeah, unless there's any further comments, I would love a motion.
Your worship, I would move that council adopt the amended Strathmore Fire Department level of service policy number 2301 as presented in attachment 1.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion now that we have a motion on the floor? Seeing none, all in favor? And that motion is carried. Thank you, Chief, Deputy Chief, and Captain for being here. Very nice for the report, and we appreciate your service and all the efforts you do in protecting our community. And that brings us to 8.4, Proclamation World Family Doctor Day. Chris, are you speaking to this one?
Yes, I can speak to this if you just give me one quick second. Okay, sorry, long agenda. Okay, I've got this here. So thank you, Mayor and Council. Administration is recommending that Council proclaim May 19th, 2022 as World Family Doctor Day. As you all know, family doctors are an essential part of our communities. And the first World Family Doctor Day was declared by the World Organization of Family Doctors in 2010. So now this annual commemoration acknowledges the contribution of doctors. This year's theme is Always There to Care, which reflects the steadfast dependability of family doctors. Throughout Alberta, 80% of care is done by family physicians. And so this role in people's lives can be fundamental throughout the entire life of them and their families. And so this is a great chance to recognize the work of family physicians, and so administration is recommending that we proclaim May the 19th, 2022 as World Family Doctor Day.
Thank you, Chris. This is actually appropriate that this is coming to us tonight because I just received an email this afternoon from Dr. Keely Abercrombie, and she's wondering again about striking a committee or what would be the approach administration as far as a possible committee, a task force to look at recruiting more doctors to our community.
Yeah, so, well, it's, you know, with the approved strategic plan tonight and the supporting corporate business plan, we've put that in there and we're starting to look at that, but
okay.
We're not going to have it done tomorrow either, so, but
sure,
we are on it.
I can report back to Keely as soon as possible. Is someone prepared to make a motion? Councillor Langmaid.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I am very pleased to bring forward the motion that Council proclaim May 19th, 2022 is World Family Doctor Day in the town of Strathmore.
Thank you for the motion. I'll call the question. All in favor? And the motion is carried. Thank you, Chris, and you're staying up for the Citizenship Awards update, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Again, thank you, Mayor and Council. So Legislative Services is providing an update on the 2022 Citizenship Awards. The Strathmore Citizenship Awards is presented annually to each school in the town of Strathmore. It's given to a student who demonstrates outstanding citizenship in the community. So each student will receive a plaque, a monetary reward, along with an all-access pass for town recreational facilities for a year. So earlier this spring, I reached out to all the schools, and they've all started to give the information about when these ceremonies will be, as well as the names. So those are still coming in. But one of the things is historically councillors have attended these ceremonies to present the awards to students. And so Legislative Services would like to coordinate with council as these things come in. So if you keep an eye on your inbox, I'll send you a poll with the dates, and then we can work to make sure that whichever councillor is available to go to the different events are able to. And if you have any questions for me, feel free to ask them now.
Thank you. And Chris, I've let the rest of the council know, I was at Strathmore High School yesterday, and they've asked me to do the awards presentation there. I'll go now to Councillor Wagoner and then Councillor Peterson.
Thank you, and thanks, Chris. I was just looking at the recipient schools and the dates and time and that. One of the ones, something I did notice is George Freeman School is not on that list. Do they not do Citizenship Awards, or they?
I'm just waiting on more information still.
Okay.
Everybody is kind of bringing it in, but I wanted to make sure that council had as much information as soon as possible because those are coming up.
Okay.
But it is coming in.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wagoner. Councillor Peterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Following Councillor Wagner, I also noticed there's a few other schools, Golden Hills Learning Academy, the Strathmore Storefront School, but also one that we've never ever acknowledged before, but they must have a presence in our community, is the St. Paul's Academy through Christ the Redeemer School Division. Is their distance program equivalent to Golden Hills Learning Academy? And we could possibly reach out to them as well, because I'm sure they must have students in your system. Councillor Wiley would know better than me, but they are a part of our community and a part of our system through Christ the Redeemer School Division. Thank you, and thank you for your work on it, Chris.
Yeah, you bet. And I will definitely do that and reach out to them. Thank you.
Thank you. No other comments? Thank you, Chris, for your presentation. That brings us to item 9, bylaws. 9.1, land use bylaw, amending bylaw number 22-18. And just to remind council that if you have any questions or comments, they typically should only concern the procedure rather than the bylaw itself. So this is one directing it for first reading so that it can go public and that we can schedule a public hearing. Councillor Peterson.
So I have a question, a procedural question, Your Worship, and that is with regards to, what we were talking about earlier in terms of procedure. I think I heard you say that if we defeated this bylaw, it would come back in 6 months' time.
I think that's the next one.
That's the next one.
Yeah.
I'm on the wrong one.
That's okay. This is bylaw number 22-18. Councillors, we're looking for a motion.
Can do that.
Thank you.
To make up for my error. I move that council give first reading to bylaw 22-18, being a bylaw to amend the land use bylaw number 14-11, and the council direct administration to schedule a public hearing for bylaw number 22-18 for July 6, 2022 at 6 p.m. in council chambers.
Thank you. You've all heard the motion. All in favor? And the motion is carried. And that brings us to 9.2, land use
Your
bylaw.
Worship, point of order.
Point of order?
We missed a vote in that last motion. Someone did not raise their hand.
Oh, in the last one? Sorry.
Yes, thank you. If we could call the vote again, please.
Sure, I'll call it. So I'm looking for a motion, or sorry, we have the motion on the floor for bylaw 22-18. I'll call the question. All in favor? And the motion is carried. Thank you. And that brings us to 9.2. Welcome back, Megan. Land use bylaw, amending bylaw number 22-01.
Good evening again, Your Worship and Council. So very exciting public hearing. I have here bylaw 2201. There are some recommended adjustments from the first reading. Pardon me. I would also like to draw council's attention that if there are sections of this bylaw that they are not comfy with, if they would like staff to do a little bit more research on, such as the CCAN section, council is at their discretion to remove that section from 2201, and we can consider the rest of the bylaw for second and third reading. As Jonathan and Kevin had mentioned, we would do a quick little recess and then adjust the bylaw and then bring it back. Yeah, I am here for any questions pertaining to the bylaw?
Thank you. Councillor Peterson?
So, Your Worship, from a procedural perspective, that would be something that I would be very interested in, and just process to do that would be to move it as amended.
My only question, and would that also not, would we also have to look at the presentation that was made by Kyle Wilson regarding the cannabis stores and distance to each other? Megan, do you want to, can you answer that one?
So in that instance, the conversation that staff has had with Kyle is that we would prefer, like with the CCAN section, to take it and do a little bit more research and engagement with the community before making recommendations to council. So the items that are in 2201 pertaining to cannabis, basically kind of like update it to what the federal and provincial regulations are. So there's nothing that's, I don't think Kyle had any concerns with the changes that were in there. What he wanted was increased setbacks for cannabis stores from like a variety of different land uses.
So would that then come back to us at a later time? Okay, and so there'd be an amendment to that bylaw?
Yeah, it would
potentially.
It would be a separate bylaw.
Okay.
Like entirely, so.
Okay.
So if I might clarify, it has to be, it's new stuff that has not been in the public advertising, the public hasn't had a chance to look at it. So, you know, basically it's not part of the public hearing materials and all the information that was put out to the public, which is why it needs to be kind of separate and something new and not included in this tonight.
Okay, thank you. I think I understand. And you're done your presentation, and you're ready for questions or comments from councillors?
I am, yes.
Anything from our councillors? Councillor Wiley.
Sure. So Megan and I guess all the councillors now have seen an email from a business owner who's concerned about the 1.8 meter walking path as well. And she points out that, yeah, ideally 1.8 meters sidewalk space would be good, but is it necessary when at the same time we're talking about trying to encourage our downtown, revitalize downtown, encourage businesses, and then we're putting on some of these restrictions? I just wondered if you could go into a little bit more about why do you recommend 1.8 meter sidewalk space around patios?
Through the chair to Councillor Wiley. So per the, I believe it's the American Disability, I wrote it down. American Disabilities Association, in their recommendations for sidewalk widths, they state that 0.9 meters is the minimum size for a single wheelchair user. So using math, to pass comfortably would be 1.8. They do state in that same document that 1.5 is the bare minimum, and that's basically the way that they describe it, is if there's a bump out, so that the two wheelchair users can pass each other in the bump out, that's 1.5 meters. A lot of the other municipalities around us are actually increasing their sidewalk width to 2 meters. The 1.8 is just kind of the happy low end to allow two users to pass each other.
So if we were to pass this then, would this negatively impact that business as far as wheelchair capacity to pass each other?
Through the chair, no, we will be granting them like a non-conformance letter.
She said that.
Okay.
Change.
Okay.
But the business owner did say that this would negatively affect her, even with the allowance that the town has worked out with her.
But it's not changing.
And then she also pointed out 4 other locations in her email. It's unfortunate she couldn't be here tonight for the discussion, but she pointed out 4 other locations that she had observed. I didn't go out with a tape measure, though I did go to her business today, and honestly, it's right in our downtown. It's the kind of thing that I think council really wants to encourage. It's this beautiful patio setup. It's got some sunshade, some planters. It's the kind of thing that makes me want to sit on a summer day and just enjoy a cup of coffee. It's the kind of business that I'd really want in our downtown area. And so I just think by moving ahead with this, it's obviously there's good reasons, but I'm not going to be supporting that. I'm going to ask that we amend it to delete this item 4.13.7H.
What page is the letter on?
We'll need one mic shut off, I think, so Megan can be
I
heard.
can shut.
Through the chair, just in response to the email, there were the two locations that she identified were the older sidewalks that aren't even 1 meter in width. So in those instances, even with the bylaw as it is now, we wouldn't be able to approve an outdoor patio.
Jamie.
Through the chair, I'd just also like to point out that bylaw amendments aren't retroactive, so we're not going to be going backwards. And as Megan pointed out, there's going to be several probably non-conforming situations. So we're not going to go and look for these issues where these are on developments moving forward, new developments.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Langmaid, then Councillor Peterson.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Megan, for your presentation today. I know in our last discussion about this, a question I asked was I brought up that I hadn't been out with a tape measure, and I still haven't found time to find my tape measure. But I do still have some concerns about existing widths, and I know that things would be grandfathered, and I appreciate where we're coming from in this amendment, and I do think it's really important. Our town must be accessible. Everyone has a right to be able to walk down the street freely and not have to worry about, can I pass through here? So I absolutely understand that. I'm worried that there are areas where we will not, where we just simply don't have 1.8 meters, and it's not because a business is in the way, it's because our sidewalk is just, quite frankly, not that wide. So I understand, how will we go forward in ensuring that we can, in the future, upgrade things to meet that requirement so that everyone does have the ability to travel freely and without restriction in our downtown, despite mobility issues that are present?
I could maybe lend some insight into that from before. Thank you, Your Worship. So in 2013, when I was first on this council in Strathmore had been taken to the Human Rights Commission because we had not met the standard on the assertion of the resident of Strathmore who brought that forward, that we had not met an acceptable level of accessibility, and we lost at the Human Rights Commission. And as you know, there are now things that we have to do in this community to meet those standards. And so I imagine that in our plans going forward, we are going to have to address this in all of these sites. The Human Rights Commission may have forgotten about us for the time being because we've done a lot of work throughout community to make our community more accessible. But those things are definitely going to come to the fore, and we will unquestionably lose again if we don't address it. And so it will be something that will have to be on our radar, and I'm supportive of what's here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Peterson. Councillor Wagner.
Yeah, this may have been mentioned, but is this strictly for the downtown, or is this for all of Strathmore, the sidewalk width requirements?
The sidewalk width requirements fall underneath the downtown overlay district, so it is in the downtown greater area. Let me see if I can find a map to show you so you can see where it affects. Hopefully I can find it real quick.
Should it not be zone specific and not area specific? So like if you've got up at the C-store, you've got other commercial retail places, not just downtown?
So the downtown overlay district is like a direct control district for all of the downtown. It contains additional regulations and requirements on top of the land use districts that are already there. So there are like 3 or 4 land use districts that kind of fall underneath the overlay. There's the downtown commercial. There's a couple of different residential districts as well. So it's just the overlay encompasses all of that. Does that make sense?
Well, I think it should be overall zone specific. If you have like a retail commercial district, and if we're striving towards new communities having more self-service for restaurants, convenience store, gas bar, that it doesn't have to be specific to downtown. Thank you.
Councillor Wiley, thank you, Councillor Mitzner.
I just want, like, I understand that there's good reasons to do this. I want council to be very aware, though, that as we create more rules and more regulations, these small businesses, and this one in particular that somehow managed to survive the last 2 years of COVID, has pointed out that she relies on these summer months. She needs this patio, that it's a good thing. And then you're restricting other businesses like these little pop-up shops with little patios, the exact kind of thing that you would want to see in our downtown. You're restricting them and making it more difficult. So I really would like to include the amendment to remove this as part of our motion tonight.
Any comments, Megan or Chuck?
I have a procedural question. So the motion itself is massive. If I were to make the motion and add in my proposed amendment, then would that make sense to discuss that, and then the rest of council could decide on that one amendment?
Jonathan, does this bring us back to the triggering of a new public hearing?
No, because it's just removing an item.
Through your worship, I'm sorry, I missed, what section of the bylaw was that again?
I believe, from when I looked at it's section 4.13.7H. Like I've got it on page, it's referred to on page 277. If you go to page 277, it's 2.16B.
So you're saying we would just delete section B?
Just delete that.
Yeah.
And then Jonathan, what does that do procedurally?
Yeah. Your worship, yeah, you can make a motion to delete that section off of bylaw 22-1.
Okay, so I wouldn't need
But-
to read the entire motion first, I could just make
I
that
would do it
motion.
separately. I would do your amendment first
I'd
before we
prefer
get
that.
into the recommended, yeah.
Okay. So with the permission of the chair, I could make that motion?
Can I just ask, just to get it straight in my mind? So it's grandfathered for the existing patios?
For 1 year, though.
No.
She was,
No,
so,
no.
yeah, please do explain that, because I didn't understand that either. Because so for her understanding, you gave her permission to keep the patio for 1 summer, and then next summer she would need to comply.
Through the chair to Councillor Wiley, so we brainstormed for a little bit to try to figure out what we could do in order to help her, like, keep her patio, right? And technically under the temporary, it would need to meet compliance next year. So if this is passed. So what we are opting to do is to write a letter instead of having to go through the development permit process, right? It's a bit cumbersome for a temporary patio. So we're gonna be writing a letter or a memo that just says, we're granting you permission to operate your outdoor patio during the summer seasons with the 1 meter walkway. So she will be like non-conforming. She'll be allowed to have her patio with the existing regulations until she stops having a business there, if that's.
So as long as she has a business, she's in compliance?
Yes.
All right. And likewise with everybody else that doesn't have the 1.8? Right, currently.
That's fantastic. I am so happy to hear you guys have worked with her in that way. That's really, really great.
Yeah,
Is
that was
it-
my understanding.
Is it correct to say a grandfather clause is grandfather? There's no term a timeline on a grandfather clause?
No, for non-conforming uses, so long as they were legal, which includes like obtaining the proper like permits, right? So long as they were legal at the time that they existed, when any amendments that come into the land use bylaw, if it makes that development or that use non-conforming, so long as it doesn't change, so long as they don't ask to like increase the size of the building, so long as there's no destruction to that building more than the 75% as per the MGA, the Municipal Government Act, they are able to continue using that space, that development, that building as it was before the bylaw change.
Yeah, what's more is when I was downtown today before coming here, like I observed that those sidewalks are so wide that most little businesses, if a new one came up, could still put out like some lawn chairs, like tables. The only reason that one went further is she had come out with some planters and the sunshade and really great additions. But no, like I can't say enough how much I appreciate the detail that you would go to, I'd seen the exchange of emails, but even since then to contact her and talk about that, that's just excellent. Thank you. No, then I have no need to make that a motion. I don't know if I have to, I don't think I can withdraw it, so we can just vote it down.
Jonathan, procedurally, can he withdraw his motion?
Sorry, I didn't hear a formal motion being made. Did you make the formal motion?
I don't think so. I don't think it actually.
It was interrupted. Never mind. No need to withdraw.
Okay.
I withdraw my
Good
withdrawal.
thing you're here, Bass. Thank you. I saw you shaking your head vigorously. If I can just circle back just to the amending bylaw. If we pass this amending bylaw, and correct me if I'm wrong, then that business group that was concerned about the vents on the sea cans can still meet with you later for possible amendments to that bylaw? Can they still meet with you to adjust the bylaw or come to us with suggestions?
Let me try and see if I get ruled out.
And then the second part is the cannabis store distances, like distances between cannabis stores, would still come back to us as a separate bylaw, possibly. Okay.
So through the chair, yes, if this bylaw is passed as it is, those changes to the CCAN section will be brought into the land use bylaw. Any changes or, so if we go and we meet with the affected parties and we come up with some changes that we would like to see, it would come back as a separate bylaw. It wouldn't be underneath 2201.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that these people, these business owners who want to meet, they're not going to see tonight's potential vote as them being ignored and they're going to be affected negatively by this amending bylaw.
And through the chair as well, as I had mentioned previously, if you wanted, if it would make you feel a little bit more comfortable with the process, you can ask to amend 2201 to remove like all mention of CCAN within this bylaw, and then we can start fresh-ish, so to speak, with those businesses.
Okay, so I guess I just want to make sure we do this the right way then. So we would pass all these amendments and add one more about dropping any reference to CCANs.
But I don't think we need to drop all reference to CCANs because some of these are really positive movements about allowing more CCANs. I think we just need to drop all reference to CCAN ventilation.
Okay.
If I heard the business
No.
owner correctly.
No. That wasn't what he was saying, totally.
Councillor Peterson and then Councillor Langmead.
My understanding, from a procedural perspective, is that we would need to remove all reference. If we are going to ask for a procedural process in this, we would have to remove all reference to CCANs and all reference to cannabis stores. Those would be two additional amendments. No?
No. Just, oh,
So my amendment would be to remove section 3.5, I'm just speaking theoretically, to remove section 3.5, which deals with CCANs, and page 98, the section that deals with CCANs. That would be my only motion to remove it, or like, to add it into the amendment, to remove it from the amending bylaw of 22-01. And I'd be happy to accept any kind of.
I'd be happy to understand what's going on right now. Megan?
Not in relation to the amendment, but I do think it is an important piece of information. So CCANs that are used for storage purposes underneath building code are required to get ventilation. So regardless, so even if we take this out, yeah, currently CCANs in town, they are all discretionary use. They all need to get a development permit and they all need to get building permit. Adding the specification and the requirement for the ventilation into the land use bylaw kind of closes off like a hole between the development permit and building permit process. It just makes sure that every CCAN used for storage, so like a more permanent CCAN, not one used that you store on your property for a couple of days. This is a CCAN that you're using for storage purposes instead of like a shed. That it has the ventilation, it has all the safety pieces in place, so that it's not constantly pushed onto the building permit side of things.
Okay, but by passing this the way it is, we're saying that if a business owner puts in a CCAN, he has to put in a vent to the specifications that are in the bylaw. And if these business owners are saying that puts them at a risk of being broken into, how does that help address their concerns? That's my confusion, Megan. You can see it on my face, probably.
Perhaps, Megan, could we talk a little bit about the code behind this? Like, this isn't really the town that is driving this, right? So, you know, I'm almost thinking about calling a recess or asking for a recess for administration to talk, because we have to be very careful as an organization when we start saying we're not going to follow the law.
Government law.
So we have to be very careful about that.
So Your Worship, for process, I think we have two considerations going forward. We can move the motion with the amendments and add an amendment to remove the CCAN portion to allow administration to bring it back as a separate bylaw. Or we can make a motion for a recess, or you can declare a recess, and administration can come back with their best advice for us to move forward. I'm prepared to move a motion to either at your discretion, Your Worship.
Okay, let me just hear from Councillor Langmaid, and then Councillor Wiley, and then we can entertain them.
My not wanting to sound like I don't want to follow code or law, it does sound like we have a group of business owners that do require that would like some additional opportunities to chime in and have some feedback heard on this section, and potentially have the opportunity for us to educate them further on the code that's required and why the town is doing this. So I would be prepared to make a motion to, be prepared to make a motion to amend the bylaw, removing references to CCANs until we can have a further conversation with business owners and bring that back at a future point in time to ensure that everyone has had an opportunity to have their voice heard, and also so that we will have the opportunity in the future to ensure that our bylaw is in line with the code that we are required to meet, that businesses are required to meet.
Your Worship, could I move a recess?
Yes, we have a motion to recess for 15 minutes? 15 minutes. All in favor? Motion is carried. We're in recess for 15 minutes.